Hey, everybody. It's Sunday, and Coach Sam and I are super excited to be on with you all and be talking about the end of the NLI and what athletes and coaches need to know. But before we dive into it, just going to do a brief little intro, talk a little bit about myself. Coach Sam will do her intro, and then we'll dive into this very hot topic. So first off, I'm Kara Hill. I started V-Ball Recruiter, known as the Red Hat Lady, and been in this business for over 14 years at this point, coming into my 15th year, which is crazy. But specialize in helping student athletes navigate the recruiting process, building their personal brand on social media, and really trying to find that perfect fit at the next level. So have had the awesome privilege to work along Coach Sam here for the last 7 years. Can't believe it. But Coach Sam, I think it's awesome to be able to do an intro and share your background, and then we'll dive into this webinar.
Yeah, hi everybody. Welcome, Coach Sam. Yeah, it's been almost 7 years since Kara and I have been together. And as I joke, as I've left the dark side to join the magical side. Prior to that, I was a college coach for 20 years between Rhodes College, Mississippi State, and Eastern Illinois. And obviously I've served in the volleyball world and all other capacities between club, committees, etc., all that stuff. And now we're here to, help you all navigate this recruiting process. And trust me, there's a lot of craziness going on in this recruiting world in general and through college athletics. So we're here to impart some wisdom and knowledge to help you navigate this better.
Yeah, so I think we'll dive in. The NLI has been really a cornerstone for college recruiting for decades. 1964 is when it was introduced. And, it binded athletes to colleges. But with the recent elimination, the landscape has shifted. And so we want to kind of dive in here and talk about these changes and how it impacts the athletes, the coaches, and the whole recruiting process. So we're going to talk about the NLI changes. Essentially, it's gone. We're going to talk about, analyzing the impacts. We're going to share steps and strategies with you all in terms of navigating your recruiting journey, and then talk a little bit about how V-Ball Recruiter can help. We also have Jen Noonan in our group here. She is our director of sales, and she will be helping to address questions. We're going to do a Q&A as we go, but she'll also be reaching out kind of after the webinar as well. So as I said, the NLI was introduced in 1964. It was designed to bind student athletes to a college. It was to prevent schools from continuing to recruit after an athlete was committed. And it was really meant to give a coach a little bit more certainty in their roster. So Sam, if you can dive in here and talk about what the NLI has been replaced with and the madness that is going on.
So with the National Letter of Intent, or as we refer to it as the NLI, not to be confused with NIL, so which can be easily confused or just interchanging those letters. But with the National Letter of Intent, this is related to to the NCAA, specifically to Division I and Division II. Division III did not have, will not have, and certainly will not in the future have an NLI, because remember, Division III does not offer any athletic money to begin with. NAIA, the other organization, as we like to say, as you like to refer to them as the rebels, because literally they can do what they want whenever they want. And if you talk to those coaches, they will tell you that point blank. They have, in essence, their own financial aid agreement that they would have their prospective student athletes, their commits sign as well, just as junior colleges as well. So now, as we move forward, starting with this signing period, really here this November, since it's November 3rd, the NLI is rest in peace, since we just got done with Halloween. And now it's going to be replaced by a financial aid agreement, or an FAA, if you just want to, instead of saying the mouthful. It is still going to financially bind those athletes. And it is between that student athlete, again, at the Division I and the Division II level, and that respective institution. I think that's the big piece here that's different, is that this is now coming, the financial aid agreement, this FAA, is coming from the respective institution itself versus the NLI, the National Letter of Intent, when it was coming directly from there. So, and the other piece of it is that whereas before, when you signed that paperwork on that given day at that certain time when you were able to start signing, is that now you actually can continue to look and see and shop around, I guess, if that's what you so choose to do, basically, which also means this is going to take on a whole different role with the coaches and how they're navigating this process with this FAA and managing that on their side. If you all are college sports fans, and you certainly follow college football, which we know is in full effect, you've probably heard many stories of football players signing their, that national letter of intent literally like 2 minutes into signing period, or coaches were waiting on bated breath for them, and then they found out that they actually signed with another school. This happens in big time Division I college football all the time. And so my gut is now that this is really going to be back to that in a lot of ways, in a lot of sports. And I know that will be obviously volleyball. It'll be really curious to see what's going to happen with this. In terms of the signing periods, I know that obviously football, basketball, they're going to continue to have their early and their regular signing periods, just as they has had. Volleyball will be able to start signing here soon as well. The dead period has kind of changed a little bit with that. And remember, because we get this question all the time, a dead period means that a coach is not able to interact with you off campus or on their respective campus. So just to clarify that, because that's always a very big misconception between dead period and quiet period, which will be approaching here next month for women's volleyball in the Division I world. So there will be like that one day of like what the initial signing date is, that for volleyball, that'll kind of be still a dead period, just that day. Otherwise, the rest of dead periods are really going away as we kind of know it. It'll be a little different, like I said, for football and men's basketball, women's basketball, because they're special.
Yeah, I know there's supposed to be a lot more changes that are coming. And so as
Yes.
things continue to unfold, we'll continue to do updates and really try and educate on the volleyball side just how things are really changing. Essentially this offers athletes, a little bit more flexibility, or what you would think is flexibility. The challenge, I think, and Sam, I know we're going to dive into this a little bit as we go through the process. Depending on the recruit, you're not really going to have that warm and fuzzy feeling anymore until you're signed, and then you essentially are getting on campus, because at this point the coaches can pull back their offer, and it was really looked, I think, more down upon before. I think you're going to have to really have some strong communication in terms of what's expected if you verbally commit to a school, and then what the expectation is from the communication perspective, because there's so much that can happen here. There's literally no penalties here before enrollment. And so you have more time. I think there's going to be a lot more babysitting. There's going to be some uncertainty here for the college coaches, as well as for you as an athlete. And so I think we're moving closer and closer to college sports looking more like professional sports. And there's going to be some angst and some anxiety that I think goes into this. So Sam, do you want to dive in about really what that greater responsibility, that freedom looks like for an athlete, kind of that a positive angle, if you will.
Sure. And I think you hit the nail on the head. If you, in the last week, UConn's women's basketball coach, Gino Auriemma, had his, they interviewed him and he said, we should really just call it what it is. We're going towards that professional model, and that's where we're at. So with for student athletes, I think that there's a lot that both the student athlete has to think about here, and then certainly the college coach in all of this. Does this provide a lot more financial, well, it could be financial, a better piece financially for you, a lot, some freedom, the ability to shop around in essence, absolutely. And you're gonna have to do your homework as schools are again giving you this financial aid agreement. It is really going to be interesting to see how each institution manages that. Like, what is the paperwork itself going to look like from each institution? And I'm sure that as we head into this signing period here, I'm sure that schools are in a mad rush of having their lawyers and everything and looking at all this. But you're going to have to really, like before, if you ever read an NLI agreement, which obviously I have serving as a former college coach, the NLI piece was pretty cut and dry, like standard contract. You weren't changing anything other than you were adding, the school was adding who you were giving this to, et cetera, what the scholarship piece was, et cetera. And then when it was for that date, then they could date, sign, email it back, or back in the day, fax it back, whatever people choose to do. Now I think you're gonna have to really pay attention to what does the FAA say coming from your respective institution. With where we're moving in the Division I world with the settlement, is that now we're moving towards this equivalency model in Division I. So we're going to start seeing in the Division I level, right? A percentage of what you're earning athletically, and then what are you also earning from the school in terms of merit money. Division II, we already know works in that model. So combining athletic, combining academic, what does that look like? So the FAA might only pertain to what you are earning athletically and what's on there. And then, right, you have to make sure that you are keeping track of what does school X say I would qualify for academically. Some schools are able to give you that number. That number could also change based on your academics and also a test score, by the way. And this is where, as we are preparing for this and thinking about this, we harp on this academic piece, and I'm going to really harp on this academic piece to all of you out there, is that this now, you taking care of business in the classroom and continuing to take care of business in the classroom could really come into play with helping you earn additional funding to pay for school. So that's a piece of the puzzle that's going to come into play, because coaches are certainly going to look at that way. And then again, you have to make sure that you're reading what everything is from an FAA agreement. And then what if school Z comes into play and they want to offer you? What are they willing to give you? And then what does their FAA look like? So now you've got to make sure that you're reading carefully and looking at what's the difference. And again, I think that this piece of making sure you are doing your homework with schools and finding that right fit. And, financially, I understand people would love to have school be as cheap as possible. Nonetheless, still finding the right fit and knowing that you're going to have a great experience on the court, off the court, academic, what's your future vision, location, building a relationship with a coaching staff, that still comes into all of this. All of that, I think, really comes even further to the forefront now as you go through this recruiting process. And we always harp on consistency, communication. You have to stay on top of things, and you got to do your job after you make a commitment and sign an FAA. Because now, what if a coach doesn't see you doing something, or what if something happens to you during club season? You have a chance to not have that FAA moving forward too.
Yeah, so the thing that's interesting about this is that you can sign, but you can also choose not to enroll. If
Yeah.
you sign, it means you aren't supposed to have communication with any other coaches. But this also means that a lot of coaches can potentially do these FAA agreements with multiple athletes. The thing that's interesting here is, most of the coaches have talked about how much more pressure they want to lay on players in this 2027 recruiting class. The thing that Sam and I keep hearing is that there were programs that didn't fare well, that didn't do well this last commitment time, if you will, this last early commitment time, beginning June 15th. Some programs weren't as aggressive as they would have liked to have been, so they want to be more aggressive this next time. Some programs were super aggressive. Clemson offered 3 setters on day 1 and told the 3 setters, 2 of whom hadn't been on campus, the first one to take the offer is the one that gets it. It'll be interesting to see what happens now in these circumstances. The power is going to be with you as a student athlete, but there's a lot of unknowns here in terms of, whether coaches are going to be really committed to you and they keep those commitments if they make these offers early. These are some of the things that, as an advocate for clients, we're going to start really paying close attention to and tracking, to be able to share whose word really means something in all of this, because it's going to feel uncomfortable for everybody. There's going to be more uncertainty for a little bit longer. You may make a verbal commitment, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to stick. And that's happened in the past, but now we're seeing more and more players decommit. So in the last 2 weeks here, there's been 3 major top Division I recruits that have changed their commitment. We've got one who was committed. Abigail Lee was committed to SMU. She switched her commitment to Georgia Tech. You got Hannah Buford, who we just did a story on. She switched from Cal to SMU. You've got Ania Warren now, who's also switched her commitment. We're going to see more and more of this, I think, happen as we have in other sports. So it's going to be really important from a communication angle. These coaches feel like they get to know you in this process. You're feeling like you're really getting to know them. And I think you're going to have to stay in way closer communication with these schools. It's going to create, I think, a lot more pressure on the coaches, right, Sam? A little more uncertainty for college coaches in this as well.
I do. I think that, we're just harping on about your controllables and what you're going to really have to make sure are continue to be your controllables. Well, I think it's that piece for the college coaches too, is managing and figuring out what does the consistency of their communication look like with you, and making sure that, it's not just showing up at a tournament and going to watch you play like right away, you know, um, you know, the babysitting piece, for lack of a better term, but that's what is that going to look like, so that you're making sure that your kids that you have committed and that you want know that your feelings haven't changed on this. So how often is that communication? Who's that communication coming from? Is it your recruiting coordinator? If you don't have a recruiting coordinator and you're a head coach who's really managing that, if your assistant coach needs to get involved with that as well. What about players too? That could be another piece of it as well, that just staying in touch with them via social media, things like that, texting as well. So I think there's probably going to be a lot of avenues that way that coaches are going to have to see and really think about, how do they improve that level of communication with their commitments as well, until that day when they step foot on campus, quite frankly.
I think one of the things that's going to be interesting too is we have name, image, and likeness. So we have NIL, and there's some talk about your NIL stuff also being incorporated in these FAA agreements. I think we'll know more in April in terms of what that's really going to look like. But your deal may change. Some schools are doing a lot more emphasis on social media. The Nebraska team is, those athletes are all from top to bottom, their whole administration. John Cook is really pushing being on TikTok and all these social platforms. He himself is building his own TikToks and creating his own content as well, and is really understanding and recognizing the importance of the brand building element in order to get those dollars for NIL. I think we're going to see more and more of this come about, because as we move into these FAA agreements, we are going to see, NIL enter the mix. So for you as a student athlete, understanding that building your brand is a crucial part in this, because the better you are at understanding social media and social media marketing, that is where the money is at. That is why it's so important as a student athlete. You're building your brand. It's also going to be really crucial for coaches to feel like they get to know you. So I wouldn't just have a volleyball only account where you're just posting content on volleyball. You need to talk about other aspects of your life to really create those relationships with the coaches and make them feel good about recruiting you. We all feel like we know people through social media, right? So the better you are at creating content and consistent content, again, not just on your volleyball, that's also going to result in, higher dollars when it comes to NIL money. So we're going to see some of that change as well as we enter, more than likely next year. I think April is when, we end up getting more decisions based on the lawsuit. For college coaches, in terms of what they'll be doing communication wise, as Sam says, they're going to have to do a whole lot more babysitting. They're going to have to really be staying in close communication with the players. But you as a player, I'm telling you, you're going to have to step up your game as well and really understand the importance of staying in close communication. Beyond making that commitment, it means you can't drop off the face of the earth. If you're waiting, if you're going to be a player that decides not to verbally commit and continue on, I don't know. We're going to see what happens here. I want to understand from the college coaches. And Sam, I don't know if you've had any conversations, in the past week about this. But I'd be curious to know, just obviously you talk to college coaches every day of your life. Any feedback that you're hearing in terms of how they plan to navigate after June 15th this year, and what they're feeling the impacts are on all of these changes?
I think a lot of it is really going to wait and see what's going to happen, like for sure. I think that the top kids in the country in the class of 27 that are getting looks, I think there's more of a pressure. There's going to be more pressure on those kids to make a decision right away. I do think that, and people are certainly going to put those offers out, and we're going to hear the stories of signing bonuses, all of that at the D1 level. I think that, there's still a lot of recruiting to be done in the class of 26, hands down. And we're also about to embark on, kids making up minds about going into the transfer portal, and having those conversations for sure. I tell everybody, even with all of this that is going on, with the elimination of the NLI to this FAA, as you're making the right decision in whatever that school is that you need to look at this as your final home at the end of the day. The portal is still not the way, unless you're a special snowflake, the portal it's a nightmare in all sports across the board, so that's something to really just say, like, well, I'll just go in the portal. Well, it doesn't work that way at the end of the day.
Yeah, over 60%. I think this last year it was like 67 or 68% of the athletes that are entering the transfer portal are not finding another home. You all need to understand that going in. You've got one shot to get this right.
And I share this on the men's basketball side, just because, again, like when you talk about men's basketball, where they are, most everybody Division I, right, is fully funded for men's basketball. That number of the kids that are not enrolled in an institution for this year, that's over 50%. I mean, that's a lot. And kids gave up money to go into the portal because they thought the grass was going to be greener on the other side, and it didn't work that way. So that's the piece there. And then I think it's like with coaches is, again, just like, what is their philosophy with recruiting? Is that going to change? Do they want to move things up on a timeline? Or, based on what's going on in the Division I world, and even with these changes that are taking place in Division II, on the Division II side, obviously this NLI piece is going away, and Division II, recruiting has become deregulated as of this year. So I think Division II coaches are still in the volleyball world are trying to manage and figure that piece out too, because this all changed as their season started. So it's going to be a work. It's certainly going to be a work in progress. I do think on the Division II side, you certainly have some coaches that are, full, again, full steam ahead with 26 and trying to get some things done. But then, the question in the back of their mind is, okay, we have a kid that gets committed. Then what do I need to do to make sure that that kid stays committed to us? Because if you think about it, on November 3rd, 2024, to when a 2026 would enroll and start preseason, that's still under two, it's under 2 years, but really it's still a lot of time at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you talked about the recruiting calendar. I think it's worth noting the recruiting calendar has changed quite a bit for this upcoming year. Coaches, in terms of the contact period and getting out to watch, they're now going to be able to get out beginning MLK weekend. So where you play MLK weekend, could impact the amount of attention you get. So there's some clubs that reevaluated their tournament schedule this upcoming season to try and figure out some of these bigger tournaments, because MLK, in the last few years hadn't necessarily been a major tournament weekend. People were playing certainly, but they were able to figure out their rosters a little bit more in the club world. And I think with recruiting coming into the mix, and coaches being out, I think that December we're going to see more of these programs trying to figure out their rosters in December and early January, so that they're going to want to make sure that they're showing well at these tournaments. So just so you're aware, coaches will be able to start going out and evaluating players beginning January 17th. That window goes through July 31st. There are some quiet periods that are mixed in here. We'll have a few quiet periods along the way where coaches will not be able to catch you play. And then we'll have essentially the camp season that opens up Memorial Day weekend. We'll start seeing more and more college programs hosting their college camps beginning that weekend.
That's correct. And as the coaches, the D1 side can be out, obviously, that middle of January, where the D2s, the D3s, the NAIs, and the JCs usually had convention centers or gyms to themselves. Now it'll be a lot more crowded, which, will be hopefully a good thing there for sure. And then just to go back to that, you mentioned the recruiting calendar. For Division I, the month of March and the first 2 weeks of April, Monday through Thursday, are quiet periods for those Division I coaches. I'm laughing because I've had this conversation with a lot of people, as I'm sure you have, and why? And they're like, the rationale is because they're in spring season. However, great, but there's some qualifiers that actually go to Monday. Some of them are Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and obviously we've seen a trend of a lot more coaches wanting to go to practices and going to practices midweek. So it's just interesting that they chose those 6 weeks basically in that regard. So
yeah, I think that was an interesting choice. And I'm curious to see what happens with this calendar as time goes on, as we see, what happens here. I really wish they would open this up and just allow the coaches to be able to go out whenever.
Have X amount of days, use their days, and they can use them as they see fit. End of story. That's been a very common piece among coaches for sure, is how they would like that to go back to.
Yeah, 100%. Well, it just makes more sense with everything that's moving more towards, being treated as a professional athlete. It makes a lot more sense for them to open things up. So I'd love to see, that change. So we'll continue to keep you all updated as things continue to evolve here. We'd love to hear if you have questions, we'd love to hear from you and certainly address any questions that you have. And we'll continue to be creating these webinars. So next Sunday, we're doing an intro to college recruiting, and we're going to really talk about the landscape of recruiting and running a marketing campaign, an effective campaign, what that looks like. Coach Sam and I are going to dive into that topic. As I said, I have Jen on here, and we have some clients that are joining, athletes that we aren't working with. Jen will reach out and want to learn a little bit more about you, and we'll go from there. We think that there's so much more to keep you updated on, and so as this continues to evolve, we will continue to do these sort of informational sessions so that we can provide insight. We also have an AI assistant that we are rolling out. Her name is Vera, where you are able to ask Vera any college recruiting and even social media marketing questions. And so that's something that we're rolling out here over the course of the next few weeks. That if you're interested in learning more, we'd love to hear from you. And for our clients, we're rolling this out here over the next couple of weeks. And so really excited about how that is going to make an impact in your journey. So Sam, thanks for tuning in tonight. And any other thoughts that you have before we wrap up?
No, I mean, I think just obviously, like as we move forward, with all of this on the D1 and the D2 side, just you need to make sure that you are really getting all the information in terms of what that FAA is going to look like and what it is in writing. And you're going to have to make sure you really, really do your homework at the end of the day. I think that that's just important, and just know that things could also change on a coach's side. And, we've always known in the D2 world that there have been kids that have earned X amount of athletic money. And then if they do their jobs, that they earn greater, an incentive, and they earn greater athletic money moving forward. So that's certainly, you just need to have pinpointed conversations. And quite frankly, coaches are going to have to really be prepared to have those exact conversations with you and be very open, forthright, and transparent with the financial piece here moving forward. But again, you're going to have to still do your homework as well, because it does come down to you finding the right fit at the end of the day.
Yeah, we started looking into attorneys that we can contract with and connect with, just to be able to advise in situations like this with the FAA agreements, and being able to evaluate and help families understand what it is that they're signing. So we'll keep you updated. I think at some point I would love to have a list of attorneys in every state that come recommended. So that's something that I have on my lovely list of things to do as we kind of dive into what this looks like, as athletes are being treated more like professional athletes here. So thank you all for tuning in. It was great to have you all here, and we look forward to seeing you here in the coming weeks as we continue our series. So thanks, y'all.
Thank you.